Welcome to Research 101. I'm your teacher, Miss Ram, or Mrs. Bads. I'm teaching research subjects for senior high school, particularly Research in Daily Life 1 and 2. In this short video, we will discuss the contents of the research proposal for an experimental study or the concept paper. As a research teacher, I would first ask my students to submit the research topic. We would discuss it and approve it before I would ask them to submit a concept paper to save time and effort. However, there are teachers who would seek first a concept paper before they would approve the research topic of their students. This is why it is important that we know how to properly and concisely write the concept paper for an experimental study. As mentioned in my previous videos on how to write the research proposal or the concept of a research study using the IMRaD format, there are two parts of the proposal, which is the introduction and the methodology. In this video, we will discuss all the contents of the introduction and how to write it properly. These are all the contents of the introduction: the background of the study, review of related literature, conceptual or theoretical frameworks, statement of the problem, definition of terms, hypothesis, significance of the study, scope, and limitations. Now, let's discuss these contents one by one. Let's start with the background of the study. In the background of the study, discuss and highlight the following. The most important one is the problem. Use the inverted pyramid as a guide. If you haven't watched my tutorial about the inverted pyramid, I'll give you a short summary of that in this video. So the inverted pyramid, you start with the global issues or the global concerns. What do you see or what is happening now in the world that you want to address, or is there a global concern that you want to address? Next is national or local issues or concerns. Look around you, what is happening in the Philippines, what is happening in your community, and see how and discuss how you want to address these concerns. And last but not the least, how you come up with this research study. What are your objectives? What are your rationale behind it? So this is how you write your work, your problem statement in your background of the study using the inverted pyramid. Also, highlight the variables or the resources that you will be utilizing in your study, your intended output from your scientific study or your experimentation, and how it could address the problems that you have mentioned in the inverted pyramid. For example, the world is experiencing waste management crisis because of the abundance of disposable plastics, the single-use materials that we just easily disposed of, like toothbrushes, razors, straws. And same is true with what we are experiencing here in the Philippines. That is the major environment concern that we have. We don't have proper waste disposals for this kind of trash. And so, as a STEM student, you want to come up with something that is sustainable to replace the single-use or disposable plastics. And since we are in a tropical country with abundant natural resources, we can look for the available trees that we have. Let's say, for example, the bamboo. And a bamboo is the most sustainable choice because it is easy to grow, it is abundant in the Philippines, and you can come up with many products with the bamboo plant. So you can use this as an example when you write down your background of the study. So lay down first the major problems that we are experiencing, then go down to what you are seeing in the community around you, how you can address these problems using the resources around us as well, and how you will utilize this to solve the problems you have mentioned. That is the best part and the most convincing way to write down your background of the study so that your concept paper will easily be approved. Remember that this is the very first thing that your readers will look into once they see your paper. So you have to make sure that you lay down the foundation of why this paper is important and why this study or this experimentation or this project is significant to your readers and to the people around the world. The next part of the introduction is the review of related literature. In this part, you have to highlight your variables or the materials that you will be using by looking into different studies, different findings, or different experimentations before about this material or these resources. Write down what they are used for, their components, what are the risks, if there is any. Also, if there are previous experimentations or relevant projects with your concept that you are about to submit, then write down or mention that as well in your review of related literature. Remember that in writing down your RRL, always mention the source, use the proper formatting. We will be using the APA formatting, that is the standard. So if your teacher would say otherwise, then follow that. But I usually utilize the APA format for my students. Also, make sure that you will be able to utilize your gathered literature for your present study, most especially for the conceptual framework, which is the next part of the introduction. For the conceptual or theoretical framework, statement of the problem, and definition of terms, I have made a separate video about this. I will link it down in the description box below. But for the purpose of this discussion, I will also summarize and give samples for these parts. So let's start with the conceptual or the theoretical framework. When writing down your conceptual framework, discuss and highlight the following: the materials or the resources that you will be using, the processes involved, the output or your project, and the potential use or benefits. Create a research paradigm. I'll show you an example and then briefly discuss it in short paragraphs and back it up with the literature that you have gathered. Here's an example of the research paradigm. So basically, you will just show the materials and then the processes on how you transform these materials into your output and how this output can be useful or beneficial to address your research problem. Next part is the statement of the problem. In this part, you have to discuss and highlight the research questions that you will address in your study, specifically the materials that you will be using, the process involved or the step-by-step procedure, the output, your intended project, and the purpose of your output. So if we go back to your research paradigm, we can see this numbers. So the materials is the number 1, process is the number 2, output is the number 3, and last or the number 4 is the benefit or use. When we translate that into statement forms for the statement of the problem, we can write down For example, what are the materials or resources to be utilized? Number 2, what are the processes or steps to be taken? Number 3, what will be the composition of the final product? And lastly, is the final product useful or beneficial? In state, what is the purpose of your study? The next part is the definition of terms. So you have to remember that you will only discuss the keywords in your research paradigm. So you have to discuss and highlight the description of the materials or the resources that you will be using. A very brief definition of the process. You can elaborate more of this in the next part, which is the methodology. And you have to write a basic description of your intended output and the definition of the use or benefit of the output. Remember that there are two types of definition, the conceptual and the operational. But since this will be an experimental study, you have to focus on the operational definitions for your paper. The next part is a very short one, which is the hypothesis. So you will only need to write down a short statement of your hypothesis. Usually, the hypothesis is the last question in the statement of the problem. So here's an example. If your question in the statement of the problem states that is the surgical mask made of bamboo fibers effective in filtering nanoparticles like viruses and bacteria, the hypothesis can be the surgical mask made of bamboo fibers is effective in filtering nanoparticles like viruses and bacteria. So basically, it is just answering your research question in your statement of the problem. The next part is the significance of the study. In this part, you will discuss and highlight the primary beneficiaries. So it can be individuals or institutions. Also, what will be the contribution of your output to science and the body of knowledge in general, and how your output can improve the quality of life. So in this part, you really have to mention who will be the recipients of your study and why your study is beneficial and why it should be allowed to be created, since this is just a proposal or a concept. So you really have to convince your teacher or your panel that your paper is significant and therefore should be implemented. The last part is the scope and limitations. In this part, you will discuss and highlight the specific components that you will be using from your listed materials or resources. So for example, if you're gonna use the bamboo, you just have to write down what part of the bamboo. If you know what specific components, write it down and explain it why it is the only part that you will be studying. Also, create a short description of your intended use for your output. So for example, you will be creating a mask. So what will be the use of the mask? Will it be surgical? Will it be daily use or regular use? Can it be used in the hospital? So you have to discuss that as well as part of your scope. And then create also a specific definition of the use or the benefit of the output. So that will be your scope, and write down the limitations. So why will you be focusing only on these materials and on this output? So you don't have to mention about the limits in terms of the methods, because that will be part of the methodological limitation on the second part of the paper, which is the methodology. So that's it. These are the parts of the research proposal for an experimental study introduction. So I will create a separate video for the methodology part of the concept paper. I hope you learned from this video, and if you do, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have other questions, you can reach me through my Instagram at the_learning_mama or follow me on my Facebook page, The Learning Mama. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. See you on the next tutorial. Bye!